Single salute. I'm Lord Maitreya, the hip hop futurist. You're now tuned into the Super Longevity Institute podcast. This evening, I have a special guest. He's a biomedical gerontologist. He's the chief science officer and co-founder of SENS Research Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in California. SENS stands for Strategy for Engineered Negligible Senescence. SENS' goal is to help build the industry that will cure aging. He received his BA in computer science and PhD in biology from the University of Cambridge. Ladies and gentlemen, hip-hop futurist, transhumanist worldwide, Dr. Aubrey D. DeGray. Welcome to the Institute. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm so happy to have you on. You're like the hardest working in gerontology as far as getting the word out. Yeah, man. Wow. I mean, for all your hard work, I don't know what you've been doing this tirelessly for years. I don't even know where to start. I guess, for our growing audience who just now getting into the possibility of us even having a conversation about aging and what can be done about it. What is aging? Can you define aging for us?
So, yeah, actually, the thing is I can. And that's actually quite surprising because a lot of people can't. A large part of the problem that we have in getting people to think, rationally about aging is because people have become so confused about it that they have contradictory definitions of it. But actually, aging is really easy to define. Aging is the combination of two processes that go on in our lives. One of them goes on starting right at the beginning of our lives, even before we're born, and that is the accumulation of damage in the body. Now, this damage is self-inflicted. It is consequences of the way the body naturally works, the processes that keep us alive from one day to the next. So that process just happens and damage accumulates. Now, the other process is the decline in function in the body. And that process does not start really until middle age or later. And then it carries on at an accelerating rate. And of course, eventually it kills us. And the reason that that second process happens at all is because the first process accumulates an amount of damage that exceeds what the body is set up to tolerate. The body is set up to tolerate quite a lot. So that means that when you're your age or my age, you're more or less all right. You're more or less as functional as we were when we were 20. But as time goes on, we get beyond the point that the body is set up to tolerate. So yeah, that's all aging is. It's a combination of those two processes. And the key thing about this is that I didn't say anything about life there, right? In other words, you could define aging in exactly the same way if you were asking about aging of a non-living machine, like a car or an airplane. And that turns out to be really useful when we start thinking about what to do about it.
Wow. Another question I have for you is, I think I seen one of your talks and you said aging is a consequence of physics and not biology. What did you mean by that?
Well, really, what I mean is no more than what I just said at the end of my previous answer, that the aging of a living organism is just the same as the aging of a non-living machine. Essentially, that any machine, so long as it's got moving parts, it's not just a computer, it's going to have damage that accumulates as a consequence of its normal operation just because of thermodynamics. It's just going to happen.
Right. The reason why I asked you that is because when you liken things to non-living things, people feel some type of way about it. You know what I'm saying? People feel like, I'm a human being. How dare you? Liken me to something that's non-living. They almost feel like it's an insult. What is that?
Well, yeah, that's true. I'm afraid that's true. Yeah. But of course, you just got to get past that. Ultimately, it's all about getting results, right? It's all about figuring out what to do about aging, what kind of medicines might work. If we can do that, then, we're going to be happy. And, getting hung up on, getting on one's high horse about, living things are so much, are somehow not comparable to non-living things. That's a real mistake. Right. In fact, it's not the first time we've made this mistake. Back in the 1700s, 1800s, people used to think that chemistry was like that, that the chemicals that living organisms were made from were somehow, completely different chemicals than what other stuff was made from. And there was this enormous revolution that happened when someone discovered that a chemical called urea, which is the thing that makes urine smell like urine, this chemical could actually be synthesized from chemicals that did not come from living organisms. And so this kind of, showed that there was an overlap. And now we understand, of course, that chemistry is just chemistry. And it's totally, we've totally dispelled that thing. So now's the time for that same thing to happen at the level of damage repair.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't know nothing about that. All right. What's the evidence? Where's the evidence that we can reverse the aging process outside of the analogy of likening it to a car?
Well, okay. So first of all, I want to just say, why would one look for evidence outside of that analogy? I think this really comes down to a big dichotomy of mindset that exists between scientists and technologists. Scientists are all about evidence. They're all about finding things out and understanding nature better and better. And technologists are all about manipulating nature, using what we already understand to figure out how to improve, human quality of life, or in this case, quantity of life. One looking at it normally, superficially, one would think, the skills and the mindset that are involved in the two cases are not very different from each other. But it turns out that they are very different from each other. The way that technologists use evidence is very different. You're constantly looking for ways to put 2 and 2 together and make 17. You're doing leaps of faith if you're doing pioneering technology. You're trying to put together things that already do this or that relatively simple thing and combining them into a state that does much more. And that's totally not the way that people who are trying to understand nature do things. So evidence is not the right thing to be looking for.
I understand. That leads me to my next question is that, okay, what is some of the technology or science what's some of the medicines that we could use today that might have a possibility to repair some of that damage that you're talking about that makes us age?
Sure. So damage repair is a lot harder than slowing aging down. In other words, slowing down the rate at which the body generates damage in the first place. But there's a quick caveat to what I just said, which is that slowing aging down a little bit is pretty easy, but slowing down aging a lot is even harder than repairing damage and reversing aging. So that's why we're looking at reversing aging. So what's available now? Really nothing's quite available, but we're close. Some of the things are in clinical trials, so that being used experimentally on humans, and they'll be available for humans properly fairly soon. There are cases where, for example, people are using stem cells to put cells back into the brain that have been lost, and the result has been Parkinson's disease, because Parkinson's disease results from having too few of a particular type of cell. Then there's bad cells called senescent cells, which accumulate in the body. You've got more of them when you're older, and they're toxic, they're bad for you. And so we've got clinical trials for drugs that can remove those cells, can cause those cells to commit suicide, basically. There is another case, which actually was in the news quite recently. A drug was approved, an antibody drug, for removal of a type of waste product that accumulates in Alzheimer's disease in the brain. So we're getting there. But for quite a lot of the other types of damage, we're still a few years away.
Interesting. You can't help but notice the name of your company. It seems like your company is going to take an engineer approach to curing aging, right? Am I right by saying that? Is that why you named
your company?
Yes,
I put the word engineering in there for a reason, not just because it made a nice, catchy acronym. Yeah. It was also because, it really tried to speak to this thing I was saying earlier about the difference of mindset between basic scientists and technologists. So, technologist is synonymous with engineers in this sense.
All right, I'm gonna ask you a few other questions outside of science because I feel like I want to. We know that you're brilliant. I know you're brilliant, and the rest of my people, my audience is gonna know you're brilliant and you're humanitarian. But I want to get to some other stuff. How did you get on the Joe Rogan show? By the way, I was like, "Dang, this is wonderful." I was so happy to see you on Joe Rogan because I know he has a great audience.
I got on the Joe Rogan show exactly the same way that I got on your show. He came to me.
Wow. Wow, that's even better.
Yeah. I mean, so I've been on Joe Rogan twice. The first time was maybe 6 years ago when not very many people had picked up on what I was doing. And then the second one was more recently, as you know.
Yeah, that made me happy because I just felt like, more and more people are becoming more interested. Because you've been doing this for years. So, and I'm sitting here like, don't you see how credible Aubrey the Gray is? You're not listening. This all makes sense. Like, so I don't know.
That doesn't really bother me too much. Okay. I understand that what I've chosen to do with my life is something very pioneering. I've chosen to do something that everybody thinks is impossible, and so I went into this with my eyes open. I knew that it was going to take quite a long time for all of this, even in the best case where I actually did figure out what to do, and how to do it. That it was going to take quite a while to get, the world on my side. And of course, that's still very much a work in progress, even now. Yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it's gone.
Man, you must have crazy patience. I would have been like, you don't want to hear about me current age? I don't want to talk to you no more. You guys have a lot of patience for this. Because to me, this is like a humanitarian goal. Like this, aging affects everybody. I don't care what economic, social economics you're in. I don't care what color skin you in. I don't care what culture in. This is going to affect everybody. So,
I mean, patience is something that I have to have when I talk to people who continue to give the stupid reasons why aging is a blessing in disguise, who are, trying to pretend that this society. In terms of actually getting on with the job, though, it's not so much patience; it's just a matter of persistence. It's just a matter of not giving up, knowing that we're moving in the right direction, even though there's still a long way to go.
Great point. I need to listen to that for sure. Okay. I got a lot of questions. Explain your idea of a pro-aging trance that everybody's in. I love that term, by the way.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased with it as well, I guess. So what I mean by the pro-aging trance is the willingness, in fact, the enthusiasm that people have for engaging and indulging in just insanely irrational beliefs to allow themselves to pretend that aging is either a blessing in disguise or else it's kind of so woven into the fabric of the universe that it will forever be off limits to medicine. Now, the reason I call it the pro-aging trance is actually because of an experience I had many, many years ago when I was an undergrad. So we're talking nearly 40 years ago now, which I was reminded of when I started having conversations about aging 20 years later, or at least 15 years later, to the general public and to even biologists. The thing I had seen when I was an undergrad was a stage hypnosis show. It was, this guy's up there and he's getting people to do funny things and it's all entertaining. But there was one particular part of the show that stuck in my mind. How this went was this. He got a guy on stage and got him into a nice deep trance. And then he convinced the guy that his right elbow was his left elbow and vice versa. He basically said, okay, no, this is actually a right elbow, this is actually a left elbow, right? And he got him to completely believe that. He didn't explore, the implications or the explanation or anything. He just said, okay, believe this. And that's what you can do when someone's in a trance, right? And then he said, okay, I would like you please to touch your right elbow with your left forefinger. Right? And so, of course, there was a lot of wriggling and writhing. You can get the idea. And that was funny, okay? But that wasn't the main point. That was funny. But then he said, okay, you can stop that now. And then he said, okay, you couldn't do it, could you? And the guy says, no. And then is the real kicker. The hypnotist says to the subject, he says, okay, why couldn't you do it? And the subject gives a completely lucid, grammatically correct, unhesitating answer, explanation. And of course, the explanation is completely insane. It has, its logic has no bearing on reality. It's like Alice in Wonderland logic. But the guy doesn't know it. And this, we're talking about a high IQ audience here, right? These are undergraduates at Cambridge University.
Wow.
They have a high respect for their own intellect and for each other's intellect. And the entire audience is friends of this guy, right, are rolling in the aisles, right? And he's just not noticing. He's just completely calm and fine with all of this, right, despite the fact that, he said something so insane. So, this is what I see when I talk to people about, where will we put everybody, or won't dictators live forever, or, doesn't death give meaning to life? Ridiculous. It's that kind of thing.
Ridiculous. The last one you said, death gives meaning to life. I work in hospice, so I talk to people who are on their deathbed, and you ask them that question, and they'll tell you what they feel like about that question. Because a lot of people don't spend a lot of time with those people. They don't.
Yeah, but also, of course, you've got to remember that the people you work with, I could not do your job. That is a really difficult job.
Yeah.
Because it involves constantly being around being reminded in your face every day of how little we can do to keep people healthy, like when they were born a long time ago, right? And that is, that's just soul destroying. A large part of why I have the persistence I have is because I don't go to hospices, and I can just, keep it abstract in my mind.
Well, you definitely, your behavior is definitely, you acting like you was in hospice every day from your tirelessly working and advocating for life extension, which I'm so happy to have came across your work, Ending Aging. Matter of fact, wait a minute, why is this not up here, by the way? There we go. I have to do you proper. Yeah. I bought this book several years ago when I first started getting into life extension, which was probably like 15 years ago. Let me make it so you don't block your head. And
let me actually, while you're on the subject of this book, let me say something about it, because I wrote it, I'm going to say 14 years ago now. And that seems like a long time. So a lot of people would say, well, okay, it's irrelevant now. We'll read newer stuff. Mm-hmm. But actually, no. It turns out that the stuff I said there is still standing the test of time. That's right. So, of course, there's been an enormous amount of progress in this time. But the science that I described there, the types of damage that we accumulate, how to classify them in a useful way that lets us talk about the way we could repair the damage, all of that has stayed the same. And that's enormously important. Because what it tells us is basically that we're probably not going to discover anything more. In other words, we probably have more or less got a sufficient level of understanding of what this damage is. There's still masses that we don't know about how the damage accumulates, but you don't need to know that. You don't need to know how the damage is generated if you're able to fix it. You can just get rid of it after it's accumulated. So, this is really an enormously, it's obviously circumstantial evidence, but it's still really good evidence that we're on track to get this licked.
Yeah, wow. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because this book it's a classic. I have it in my library. It's a classic. I was like, Dad, what type of beer can I drink to make that would make Aubrey the Great say, I couldn't think of anything, so I just got wine. I was thinking, Dad, what type of beer can I drink? Do you still drink beer, Aubrey the Great?
Occasionally.
I was like, what type of beer do you drink usually?
Well, I'm not. But people somehow get the impression that I might be a beer snob, but I'm not really. I knew that though. I will certainly not drink anything that has either the word Budweiser or the word light in its name. Right. But beyond that, I will probably more or less drink it. I mean, I like IPAs. I like British beers, but but in the US, where I live now in California, we are not short of good beers. It's a perfectly good place to be.
Well, that's good. The next time you come on, I'm gonna have something unique, something good. What are senescent cells?
What are senescent cells? Okay, so yeah, this is a term that's probably not very well understood by most people. So about, I'm going to say, nearly 60 years ago, a really important biologist studying aging named Len Hayflick discovered that if you take cells out of a person and you just fit them in the laboratory in a petri dish, and you give them what they need to divide, and you just carry on doing that, and they can divide and divide and divide. Eventually, they just stop for no apparent reason. And it took a while to discover what the actual reason is. And in this case, it's normally because the ends of the chromosomes are getting so short that they don't work properly anymore. And the cell just notices that there's not enough DNA at the end of the chromosomes. There are actually plenty of other ways in the body in which cells can go into the same kind of state. Essentially, any kind of DNA damage, it doesn't have to be the end of the chromosomes, can have more or less the same impact in terms of sending a cell into this state. And there are other reasons why cells get into this state on purpose. It turns out that this is also related to wound healing. So when you have a cut, for example, cells spontaneously go senescent, just briefly, just temporarily. So anyway, why is this all important for aging? Basically because if senescent cells hang out in the body for a long time, they're toxic. They they secrete proteins that are bad for neighboring cells. Now, that means that we want to get rid of these cells. And so people have been looking at ways to do this. They've been looking for quite a while. When I first set out the kind of plan that I talk about in my book, this was one of the major areas. So there's a whole chapter about senescent cells. We've now moved on over the past few years to the point where we actually have drugs, actually have pharmaceuticals that are reasonably good at selectively killing such cells without killing too many good cells. And of course, it's still early days. These things are still in clinical trials, but this is a big part of what we need to do. It's been shown in laboratory organisms like mice and rats that if you get rid of senescent cells really well, then lots of things go better. Lots of aspects of the health, the ill health of late life are postponed. They're not eliminated completely, but they are postponed. You wouldn't expect them to be eliminated completely because you've got a bunch of other things we also need to fix in parallel we can't fix yet. Right. And we're getting there. But yeah, senescent cells is one of the big highlights right now, the things that are going fastest in terms of real damage repair in aging.
Wow. Why do most gerontologists believe that they can't cure aging or reverse aging, do anything about aging? It's such a negative attitude.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got to be very careful with what you just said. What you said is a statement about what gerontologists think. But all that you actually know is what gerontologists say they think, which is not the same thing at all. Remember that gerontologists, by and large, have a big problem, which is shared by essentially all scientists. They have to get money out of the government. And there's not nearly enough money available, so they have to compete with each other. Now, in the case of the biology of aging, the scientists are working with each other, but they are working on a topic that is of intense interest to the general public, so they're on television and on podcasts all the time. And that means that they have to be thinking about what they say. They have to be saying things that will not allow the government to say, oh dear, this scientist said some irresponsible thing to Maitreya on his podcast, therefore let's not fund his grant application. I have been in the very privileged position for the past 15 years or so of doing a lot of media, but I'm funded by philanthropy. I have an independent foundation, right, that supplies me with money. So the only people that I have to convince that what I'm saying is both responsible and correct are the people who directly supply money to my foundation. And that's not the same at all. Now, The things are changing, though. The other people, the rest of the world, in the thought leaders and the researchers in this field who talk to the media and the general public, are becoming a lot more gung-ho now because they can get away with it. And the reason they can get away with it is because the actual science has moved forward
Right.
at an accelerating rate over the past few years. So I like to make fun of my good friend David Sinclair, who's another very important thought leader in this field. He has the disadvantage of being a professor at Harvard, which means he was vulnerable to what I just told you.
Yeah.
But he's also, as courageous as he can get away with. And 18 months ago, he wrote a book which was called "Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to." Now, I'm telling you, if he'd written a book like that in the same year that I wrote my book called Ending Aging, he'd have been fired from Harvard. But now he can get away with it because the science has moved on.
Thank
So
goodness.
when you look at other scientists, other gerontologists saying, pessimistic things, first of all, look at how long ago they said it, because people are saying very different things now than the same people said even 5 years ago. And also, look at how fast things are continuing to change.
Yeah, thanks for making for clearing that all up and showing us where we was back then to where we are now. Yeah, I see the difference, and I'm happy about it. I'm very happy about it. All right, I have to ask you a specific question because my father has Parkinson's. Do you know any any small breakthroughs in Parkinson's research right now that you know about?
So what I would like to highlight here is not any small breakthrough, but a huge breakthrough.
Uh-oh.
But it's not quite available to your father yet, but it's close. And it really starts from a breakthrough that was made a long time ago, more than 25 years ago. So Parkinson's disease has a relatively simple etiology, how it comes about, as compared to a lot of the other aspects of aging, like Alzheimer's, for example. In Parkinson's disease, what happens is that there's one type of brain cell, one type of neuron called a dopaminergic neuron, which sits in a particular small part of the brain called the substantia nigra. And these neurons, because of what they do, because of the work they do, they end up dying a lot faster than other neurons in the brain, a lot faster. But just like all the other neurons in the brain, they are not automatically replaced by cell division, the way the blood is, for example, or the liver, right, when they die. So that means that in the substantia nigra, cells, the dopaminergic neurons, are dying all the time, and the total number of dopaminergic neurons is going down all the time in all of us. Now, that part of the brain is built so as to be able to cope with a bit of loss of cells, right? But only a bit. So all of us will have lost maybe a quarter of the dopaminergic neurons we had when we were 20 by the time we're in old age. But a quarter is okay. That doesn't have any symptoms. But like everything in aging, some people have the accumulation of this problem faster than others.
Right.
And sure enough, some people lose maybe 3/4 of their dopaminergic neurons by old age, and your father's one of those. People who have lost so many that they're not making enough of the wonderful chemical called dopamine, which dopaminergic neurons make. All right, so what do we do about this? Well, the key answer is we put cells back. We help the body out. The body is not making new dopaminergic neurons on its own, so let's just give it some. And of course, the way you do actually give the neurons themselves, you give what are called dopaminergic precursor cells, which are cells that can divide and then become replacements for the cells that the body's not replacing on its own. All right. So this is so obvious to biologists that it was first tried 30 years ago.
Wow.
In Europe, actually, a group in Sweden did this work.
Wow.
And what they did was back then we didn't know bugger all about how to manipulate stem cells in the laboratory. And they recognized very much that not all stem cells are equal, that you've got to have the right kind of stem cell. But they didn't know how to actually get them, how to make them. So they had to actually isolate them from somewhere. And the best they had was they went to aborted fetuses and they isolated cells from roughly the right part of the brain, the correct part of the brain, roughly. That's the best they could do. So it was unbelievably hit and miss, right? But they injected these cells into Parkinson's patients. And sure enough, most of the time, absolutely nothing happened. Right? There was no benefit. They didn't inject any of the right kind of cells. But occasionally they got a response because they had got lucky, and got the right kind of cell. And when they got a response, they got a spectacular response. I mean, really insanely good. So about, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago, the group from Sweden that did this work, they did a little retrospective. They did a little review article on the 25th anniversary of the treatment of the first responder, the first person who actually did respond well.
Wow.
That person has had clear Parkinson's symptoms, was on this L-dopa kind of chemical, this precursor of dopamine that you've probably heard of. And, after a couple of years, he was doing so well, was so asymptomatic that they took him off L-dopa. And he was still asymptomatic.
Wow.
After one injection of these stem cells, right?
That's crazy.
And he stayed that way for like 10 more years. Eventually, gradually, the symptoms came back. But the thing is, as I say, it was extraordinarily hit and miss. A couple of groups in America decided to try to reproduce the trial. They didn't get any success at all. Wow. So everybody more or less gave up on this. But of course, now we're in a very different world. We're in a world where we can get exactly the right kind of stem cell, pretty straightforwardly in the laboratory so that we know what we're injecting. And so sure enough, everyone's very happy about this. And there's a group in Japan that's already initiated a clinical trial for this, for doing stem cell therapy for Parkinson's. There's a couple of groups in the US doing the same, just gearing up. So we're very close to something that it has a high probability of being a proper cure for Parkinson's disease.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Wow, that's very encouraging. What do you do to stay healthy?
What do I do?
You're pretty much in I see sometimes. Aubrey the Gray is in shape, man. He's doing all right, man. He's doing good.
I'm in shape.
He's doing good, man.
I have an adequate amount of horizontal exercise, even though I don't have much else. And I basically, I'm just lucky. Wow. I was built well. I don't get jet lag at all. I can eat and drink more or less exactly what I like, and nothing seems to happen. And because I'm prominent, I've been able to get free, really high-end tests of my biological age. I think probably six times now over the past 20 years. And every single time I've done this, I come out way younger than I actually am. So, of course, what this means is that even as things come along that seem like they're probably good for people, I need to be unusually conservative. I need to take the, if it ain't broke, don't fix it attitude. Right. And that's not to say that I think I'm immortal. Don't get me wrong. I pay very close attention to my health. And, I want to pick up anything that is going wrong as soon as it does. But before it goes wrong, I have to be unusually conservative.
You was on a Netflix film with Dr. Andrews?
Oh, Bill Andrews, yes, certainly, yes. Yeah. So I think actually in that movie there was they showed a bunch of the tests that I got once. Yeah, that was the test number 4 out of the 6 that I've done.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was with a very high-end physician named Terry Grossman in Denver. So that's the kind of thing that I've had done a few times.
Dag, I want to get Terry Grossman on the show. I want to do some of them tests. I probably will do a bad job because I got a desk job and I need to move a little bit more. But I would love to take that test. Can you tell us the difference between chronological age and biological age for our audience who just now hearing you about this whole field?
So I'll do better than that. I'll tell you the difference between chronological age, biological age, and perceived biological age. So chronological age is a really easy thing to define. It's simply how old you are, how long ago you were born. Okay, that's straightforward. Biological age is how much damage you have in your body. How much of this, remember I was explaining what aging is at the beginning, how it's like this accumulation of damage, this one process, and eventually the damage is more than what the body is set up to tolerate, and therefore you start to go downhill. So that's the second process. So yes, biological age can simply be defined as the amount of damage in your body. But then there's perceived biological age. And the reason I make this distinction is because most of the types of damage that matter in the body, the things that eventually lead you to get sick, are things that we can't yet measure directly, or at least not accurately enough to really, be able to put a proper number on that biological age.
Mm.
And that's a real pity, because it means that we have to rely on proxies, on things that seem to accumulate in lockstep with the actual damage, which are not themselves contributors to eventual pathology and ill health. But yet we have reason to believe that they are in lockstep, and therefore we can measure them as a kind of proxy. These proxies are not yet very good. I just have got to tell you that. And especially the real thing that they're not very good at yet is tracking intervention. In other words, if there's something that you do to your body, whether it's a drug or a lifestyle change or whatever, then maybe it will impact the biological age that we can measure, the perceived biological age, and maybe it will impact your actual biological age, the amount of damage in your body. But it quite often does one and not the other, which is not what we want.
Wow. Let me ask you another question. How did you meet DJ? What's his name? DJ Aoki. I think I say his name right.
DJ Aoki, yeah.
Yeah, he's incredible. He's an incredible DJ. I like when the scientists collaborate with the musicians. You and Ray Kurzweil, I love it when y'all do that. I love that because it's just I love that.
Steve did. He was a great person to meet.
Yeah.
He actually, I think it was through my wonderful head of outreach, Maria Entrigas. So I have this this amazing colleague. She's worked for me for a long time now.
Wow.
Before she worked for me, she was a singer-songwriter in Hollywood for quite a long time, like 20 years. She's originally from Argentina. But that meant she has enormous numbers of connections in the entertainment industry. So it was largely through her that I met Steve. Yeah, Steve's a great guy.
He is.
But I have to say that because he's given us a significant amount of money, but also because he's genuinely done a lot of non-monetary support as well. He's put me on his records and stuff like that. So he's a dude.
Yeah, I love that. And shout outs to him. Shout outs to you, Ayo. I really thank you for having Aubrey the Gray on your platform and letting the other people know who he is, because he's definitely deserving. And people definitely need to know what he's doing, why he's doing it. And they need to know about the research he's doing at SENS. Incredible. I love that. Okay, let's see. How many people die from aging a day? I know that's a basic question that you answered a bunch of times, but I still have to ask that.
Yeah, it's roughly 110,000 at the moment. So that means more than 2/3, more than 70% actually of the total number of deaths worldwide. The other deaths are obviously from infections and from road accidents and so on. And to some extent, you can't precisely make a black and white distinction because, of course, look at COVID, for example. That's an infection. It can kill young people, but it kills older people a lot more. So you have to be a little subtle if you really want an accurate number, a precise number there, and you can more or less choose what your number is going to be. But it's definitely around 70%, which means around 110,000 a day.
Wow. Yeah. That's a lot. And how long can we push the lifespan? Extend the lifespan.
Once we get this damage repair thing going, it's completely obvious that there is no limit to how long people can stay healthy, and therefore how long people can live. It's just like cars again. If you supposing we could transport you back 100 years, and you could talk to someone who had just manufactured a car which, in fact, lasted 100 years. We know that those cars exist, right? If you'd asked that person whether they thought that any of the cars they were creating could possibly last 100 years, they'd have totally laughed at you, right? But, we only need to get good enough at preventative maintenance on cars, at removal of rust and so on, and bang, you're there, right? That's all we need. We just, if you ask someone today who owns one of those cars that's 100 years old today, and you ask them whether the car's going to last another 100 years, they'll say, well, of course it is. Why not? Right? There's totally no limit once we get this rejuvenation, damage repair thing sorted out.
Wow. Everyone, tell your kids, get everybody involved, get the young ones involved, let them become scientists to try to figure this out. Everybody needs to get involved. Write about it, sing about it. We need to get everybody involved with this campaign to reverse the aging process. It's a universal problem. What animals don't age? Because they think this aging thing is universal, and it's not. Not in the way
It's
we
not
think about
universal.
it.
It's not universal. You're quite right, but we've got to be very careful because this turns out to be a very slippery topic.
Right.
So the only animals that we know absolutely don't age, because we've measured them for long enough and we can really tell, these are really primitive animals. So there's an animal called Hydra, which, it's only a couple of millimeters long and it's only got like 20 different types of cell, and we're very sure that they don't age at all. Sea anemones also. But the thing about them is they don't have brains. I mean, they don't have any nervous system to speak of, right? That's the problem because, I don't know about you, but I'm fairly fond of my nervous system and I'm not really inclined to give it up in order to, right? There's a famous type of very primitive organism called Turritopsis, which got into the news a lot a few years ago because you can actually get it to age in reverse to kind of, reverse back into a kind of primitive form and then redevelop into an adult form. And you can do this multiple times. But so the hell what? That's got no relevance to you and me, right?
Right.
So we don't want to think about that. If we go up the evolutionary ladder, we've got better luck, but not necessarily all that much better luck, because the organisms that we can look at next, things like lobsters, for example, they seem to live a really long time.
Yeah.
And that's pretty interesting. They've definitely got a nervous system, right? And so on. But here's the thing that they have that we don't have. They carry on growing all their lives. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is important because the only way you can do that, you can carry on getting bigger, is if you can add new cells to every single tissue in your body, your heart, your brain, everything, right? Whereas you and I, we don't have that. We have a fixed size in adulthood, right? And that means that we just give up on that. There are no stem cells to replace or to add to the cells in the heart, for example, or most parts of the brain. And that means there are also no cells to do what I was saying earlier about Parkinson's disease, to replace cells that die. So the way we get to be as old as we are is by struggling on and basically causing the cells that already exist to not die even when they've got a lot of damage. And there's only so far that you can push that kind of strategy. So, again, organisms that grow essentially indefinitely, they are not terribly informative in terms of any kind of ideas that we might use therapeutically. The next category of organism that lives a really long time, and maybe, when people argue about whether they live indefinitely, are cold-blooded organisms. So, again, some of these also fall into the previous category of they grow forever, but some of them don't. So there's a famous type of rodent called a naked mole rat.
Right.
And they are obviously, they're mammals, so they're warm-blooded, kinda, but only kinda. Basically, the thing about naked mole rats is that their natural environment is they live about a yard underground in the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. And that means that they're warm all the time without having to work to be warm, right? In fact, even the temperature change from day and night, between day and night, is only about 1 degree centigrade, right? So they really don't have to breathe very much in order to stay warm. And that's really important because breathing is really bad for you. And I do not mean breathing pollutants. I mean the oxygen is bad for you because oxygen is used in the cell to extract energy from nutrients, and that extraction process creates toxic molecules called free radicals.
Free radicals, yeah.
So breathing is by far the worst thing you're doing right now for your aging, but it's a bit non-negotiable, really. But naked mole rats don't have to do so much of it. So again, another example is whales. Big whales, bowhead whales, for example, they live longer than us, that's for sure. But how? They're just big. And that matters because even though they have to be warm and they're living in a cold environment, they've got this enormously favorable surface to volume ratio. They've got a lot of cells that can make a little bit of heat, and the heat only gets out into through the surface, right? So just by being big, that helps. So what do we have left? Well, not a lot, to be honest.
Mm,
One thing we've got is birds. So birds live, but we don't know any immortal birds, any birds that even look as though they don't age,
right.
but they will age a lot more slowly than mammals. They're mammals of the same size.
Mm,
And we believe that this is real. That actually this is because they're genuinely better at, for example, not making free radicals when they breathe. Because they breathe more than we do, right? They have to breathe a lot to flap,
right.
right? Um, but there, you have to figure out how we would use that information. And that turns out to be really tricky. It turns out that, you'd have to mess around with a lot of different genes in order to do anything. It's not a practical medical option.
Mm,
The final option, however, is perhaps the most interesting at the moment. And this, of course, changes over time. And this actually goes back to the naked mole rat that I mentioned, the one that doesn't breathe very much. Even even though that's a kind of excuse for not caring about most aspects of its aging, there's one aspect that's really huge, which is cancer. Naked mole rats pretty much never get cancer, and we're only at the very beginning of understanding why. We have identified a couple of tricks that they play
wow.
that may very well be really big and may be translatable to humans. And that would be very, very valuable indeed, of course.
Mm,
So the short answer to your question is that there is no short answer. In other words,
right.
long-lived organisms in general are almost always uninformative and not useful. But
Wow.
we should carry on looking because there may be a few exceptions here and there, things that we can actually make use of.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you said that. Um. Wow. Okay. Do you think that? Okay. You know what? We talk about humanitarianism and stuff like that, which is all good. And as here at Super Longevity Institute, we all about humanitarian work. We want to encourage hip hoppers all over the world to help improve the world and do something good for the world. But the, without an economic imperative, without having an economic, we do live in capitalism. We are in a capitalistic system. We do need to make money for what we do. I want to ask you: do you think that the super longevity or the life extension industry will grow where it can generate just as much, generate a lot of money in the future? Will it be economically, uh, it will make
Well,
money?
put it like this: if you had an industry that had
Mm,
7 billion customers, and the thing that you were selling them was the thing that they wanted more than anything else in the world,
that's right.
do you think you'd make money?
Of
You
course.
probably would, really,
Yeah.
right? I mean, yeah. And this is because, of course, this is the case, right? People want their health more than they want anything else. So, yeah, I mean, this will undoubtedly be by far the biggest industry of all time. It will like completely overshadow anything like the .com boom or whatever.
Listen
And
up.
of course, it won't have a bust either, the way the .com boom did, because no
Exactly.
one's going to stop wanting to stay healthy, right?
Listen up, hip hop boys
Um,
and girls. Listen
so
up.
yeah, so this is going to be enormous, and of course, we need to be thinking about that now,
Exactly.
because even though this is still some way away, there are plenty of people out there who realise that they can make money out of it in advance. A huge part of why things are going faster now than they were even 5 years ago, a lot faster, is that people like that, people who are, they'd like to live a long time, but also they'd really like to make money in the meantime, those people are beginning to realize that the science has got far enough that they can make money. They can actually join the dots between where we are and eventual revenue. And so even though my organization is a non-profit and I am the least entrepreneurial person you'll ever meet, nevertheless, I work very heavily with investors and, of course, founders of startup companies and so on. Indeed, my foundation has a business model now, which essentially consists of we work on projects for as long as it takes to get them to a sufficient level of proof of concept that investors start to get interested, even if it's only the more courageous extreme end of the tail of the curve. Um, and then we spin those projects out as startup companies. We've done that half a dozen times
Wow.
now. And
Wonderful.
of course, it allows the projects to go a lot faster because investors tend to write bigger checks than donors do. Um, so yeah, this is very. I mean, the private sector is very much our friend here. people terribly worry wrongly about things like, oh dear, won't important technologies for longevity get into monopolies, and people will start restricting access to them. Bullshit. I mean, at the end of the day, the way you make money is by having customers, and the more customers you have, the better. Plus, also, we've got to remember that that companies work within the law. So they work within rules that are defined by governments, which by and large are elected by the people. So again, if this is the thing you want to vote for, then you will not, you'll get it pretty soon.
Aubrey the Great, you have a dope job. I mean, I mean, this is I can't think of this. You just have a great job going around the world, just working at SENS. I mean, it's like, you're like, this is a dope job,
Let
man.
me actually answer you. You're so right. I am so privileged. I chose to spend my life trying to make a difference, and I've got to the pinnacle of my profession quite some time ago, and I've stayed there. I am the most privileged person. I have the best job I could possibly imagine. And so the people I really look up to are the foot soldiers, the people who work in this community, but who don't get on your podcast every other day. People who are grinding away every bit as hard as I am. They're just as committed, and they don't get people coming up to them in the street and saying how much they support their work, right? The way I do. So I really look up to the foot soldiers.
I appreciate you saying that. You're a very humble person, and I just want to tell the public that the way I got convinced that we can do something about aging is by listening to Aubrey the Great. So I'm coming full circle right now, and I'm very excited and very happy to have him on. I waited to have him on. I was like, let me just get a little better. I'm not too much of a public person. I'm very introverted. I just wanted to wait before I asked him, but you were first on my list. I was like, I gotta get him on, but I'm gonna wait until I feel more comfortable on the camera, then I'll have him on. But it's been wonderful to talk to you, man. And I have so many other questions. I could spend hours talking to Aubrey the Great. I mean, he's a wealth of information, and it's a privilege, and I'm very happy to have you on. What advice do you have to the hip hop community? What can we do to help carry a message on and carry the life extension message on? What can we do as a culture?
So of course the thing that I would recommend any particular person depends very much on the person. Clearly, this area, even though the private sector is coming in and investors are coming in still, it's very underfunded. So anyone who's seriously wealthy can help a lot simply by providing funds. Similarly, anyone who is maybe a young undergrad biologist and they're deciding what kind of field to go into for their PhD, for example, they can make a choice based on where they think they're going to be able to make the most difference to the longevity mission, which is not by any means always obvious. There's lots of things you can do that would not be called the biology of aging, but are still really important, and vice versa. So, we encourage people to talk to us before they make decisions like that.
Right.
Then, of course, the huge thing that people can do is what you're doing right now. Get the word out by interviewing me, interviewing other people, get people more knowledgeable, more educated about the fact that this is not science fiction, that this is not a pipe dream, this is foreseeable, and therefore whatever anyone can do to make it come sooner will save lives. 110,000 lives a day is a hell of a lot of lives, let's remember, right? And so everybody else, well, I mean, hip hop is entertainment, it's music, right? It appeals to people's emotions. And at the end of the day, a lot of what people do comes down to what appeals to people's emotions.
Right.
I think, leveraging that is a big deal. We've got to understand that this is an emotional thing in large part. One of my biggest problems right now is the fact that there's a lot of science fiction out there, especially in the movies, about a post-aging world, and almost entirely it is dystopic. It's starting out with some kind of, constructing the movie on the basis that, oh dear, there's nowhere to put all the people, so we've got to kill everyone when they reach the age of 30 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Which is completely uncriticized, right? Just assumed at the beginning. And the reason this happens, of course, is because it helps people to walk out of the cinema with their pro-aging trance further reinforced, which is not helpful to me, right?
Exactly.
So anything we can do against that, producing pro-anti-aging entertainment, whether it's music or whatever, that is really an important thing.
Yeah, I agree. We can't allow those messages to be stronger than the life institute community's voice about the benefits of the reversal of aging. So that's a fact. Yeah, and Hollywood has a big they have a lot of power to stir people's minds in the right or wrong way. But you know what? I think that more people are gonna get into entertainment and more messages will get out there. I know my brother is doing the Tim Morpin is doing the movie called The Last Generation to Die. I've been waiting for that for a long time. And I know that's gonna be brilliant. I really support that. So I know that we're gonna get out there and do more work and do more movies. I still want to see a documentary about Robert Ethinger. I still think we need to do a Hollywood movie about Robert Ethinger. We need more documentaries about what you're doing, about how you started to inspire people, because I want to know how.
So I guess maybe a few people listening who don't know who Robert Ettinger is. So let me first of all completely support what you said.
Thank you.
Robert Ettinger was the founder of the idea of cryopreservation, of cryonics. And cryonics, I absolutely agree with you, is enormously neglected. It is even more neglected than the work I do in terms of its ability to save lives. And the fact is that there is an enormous opportunity right now to use relatively small amounts of money to enormously accelerate some research that can hugely improve the quality with which cryopreservation could be done, and therefore the probability that people can be revived in the future. This is something that, I've been working to try to make happen for a long time. Despite the fact that I have a lot of good connections, including wealthy ones, it's been very hard work. Yeah. And I would so love the entertainment industry to start presenting cryonics in a manner that is not just frivolous, the way it has been for the past 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely agree with that. And your cryonist is also signed up with Alcor, right?
I am, yes. I've been on their scientific advisory board for nearly 20 years.
You've been in scientific advisory board, right? Wow. Wow. Oh, is there still a Medusa Prize? Is that still available? Is that still going on?
In a way. So, okay. So this was an initiative that I created in concert with a wonderful businessman named David Goebel back in the early 2000s, nearly 20 years ago now. This was what we did as our first step in getting this work going. We didn't have any money to speak of back then, so we thought, okay, what we can do, rather than funding research, because we don't have money to do that, we will instead just improve raise the profile of longevity research by, exposing it to a bigger audience. And we realized, especially Dave did, that prizes were a great way to do that. So we created these prizes that we would give you money if you create mice that live longer than mice have ever lived before. And of course, the money we gave you, depending on how much money we had, so we encouraged people to give us money that would go into this pot to be given out in this case, right? Now, the way we structured it was conveniently such that even though we never got to pay out, we received enough money that eventually we could start research. And so around 2009, we actually split the foundation in two, and the Methuselah Foundation very much still exists, and it's pursuing prizes, among other things. And we created Sense Research Foundation to pursue the research. But yes, to answer your question directly, the Methuselah prizes as they originally were have been pretty much discontinued. Mm-hmm. But the Methuselah Foundation has moved into other prizes that have been very high profile in terms of organ construction with 3D printing and such like. Mm-hmm. Including quite recently, they've worked in concert with NASA to do prizes like this, and that's been very effective.
Wow. Okay. I think. Wow. I have to ask this question. What is longevity escape velocity? I can't leave without asking you that question. What was I?
That's fair enough. Yeah, so this is a concept that I put forward. I don't think it was really original with me, but I started to promote it around 2004. And it's a very simple idea. So since we are, it goes back to my definition of aging, that these two processes. There is a process that creates damage throughout our life, and there's a process that makes us go into decline late in life. And the reason that the second process only occurs late in life is because the body is set up to tolerate a certain amount of damage without a significant decline in function. So if we can repair damage, then we can indefinitely keep the amount of damage below that threshold that kicks off the second process, the late life process, and that's the goal. So then the question is, how do we do that? Well, if we develop a bunch of therapies that repair damage, chances are that initially they will not be 100% comprehensive. We'll be able to repair, most of the damage, but not all. So supposing we take someone who's, let's say, 60, and we do that to that. So we take them back to being, being biologically 30. In other words, having the amount of damage that they would have had when they were 30. Then we wait. We don't wait, of course. We just, they carry on getting older, chronologically older. And the thing is, they're going to be still going to be accumulating damage, even if we carry on giving them the therapies every week, or every month, because there's this other type, this difficult damage that the therapies are not succeeding in repairing, that is still accumulating, right? And eventually that difficult damage on its own is going to be sufficient to get them back to being biologically 60, right? Even though there's no easy damage left because we're repairing it all the time. So then, if we just carry on repairing the easy damage, well, that's no use, is it really? The person's going to carry on getting biologically older and eventually they'll get sick and they'll die. But luckily, we don't have to think about that because they won't get back to being biologically 60 for the second time until they're chronologically, let's say, 90, right? And that whole years that people like me have had to improve the therapy. So by the time they're actually 90 and biologically 60 for the second time, they're actually going to be able to get better therapies, Sense 2.0, let's call it, right? So that those therapies will be able to repair not only the easy damage, but also some, albeit not all, of the difficult damage. So in other words, we will actually be able to genuinely re-rejuvenate the same people so that they won't be biologically 60 for the third time until they're, let's say, 150, and so on. So basically, all we're doing here is staying one step ahead of the problem. And longevity escape velocity, the way I defined it, is simply the minimum rate at which we will have to continue to improve the comprehensiveness of the therapies so that people who are getting the state-of-the-art therapies at any given point will actually never have enough damage to make them sick. Now, the great news is that if you think about it, longevity escape velocity is a number that slows down over time because the more the closer you get to being truly comprehensive, the longer it's going to take for the damage that you still can't fix to get to a point that actually is bad for you. So basically what this means is that once we first reach longevity escape velocity, and of course I don't know how soon that's going to be, but I think we have a 50-50 chance of getting there within 15 years from now. Once we get there, we're done. We're never gonna have the faintest difficulty staying ahead of longevity escape velocity. So there'll be this one singular point, which people have been calling the Methuselarity. That's not my word, but I like it.
I like it too.
That where we will actually have aging licked.
Wow, thank you for explaining that. I got one more question before I head out. No, I think that's it. I really thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed this talk, and I'm definitely, when next time I have you on, if you are available to come on in the future, I will definitely have more questions that'll be more sophisticated than more deeper questions than we have today. This was like a 101 because I just want to get people interested in what you have to say. I'm trying to get people in the hip hop community to be scientists that want to take up this endeavor of joining the fight to reverse the aging process. It's a pleasure to have Dr. Aubrey D. DeGray on. Please look him up. If you have money, please donate. He's well deserving of it. Sins is well deserving of it. I don't know what more to say. I have one of my heroes on. I'm happy. I'm celebrating. I have my Merlot. I'm very happy to have him on. Thank you, Dr. Aubrey the Great. I know you're a busy man. I hope to have you on in the future. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you for inspiring me. I really thank you for having giving me the chance to even say this to you.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I certainly look forward to coming back again in the future, and I'm delighted to have been able to speak to your audience.
Thank you. Have a wonderful night. Peace. Shout out to all the Sins. Everybody who works at Sins, shout out to you. Thank you for all you do. One love. Super Longevity Institute, Dr. Aubrey the Great. Peace, Dr. Aubrey the Great.
Rock and roll. Rock and roll. Okay, my friend. I have to run now. I have to get on another call.
Yes, thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Great.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.